Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 8-game Major League Baseball slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really helps the channel a lot. Really do appreciate it. So this particular slate, I don't love. There are a decent amount of pitchers that are useful, but it's definitely a risky slate, and the bats really kind of conflict with what the good pitching is. So I do suspect it's going to be a kind of an odd slate. Going to be somewhat hard to be hard to be super successful. So anyhow, let's go ahead and get into the slate. Let's check out the weather first here. So let me pull that up. So let's check this here. MLB weather looks like everything's going to be clear. We might have a little bit of a boost in San Francisco. Oh, actually, it looks like it's going to be a negative boost for hitting in Milwaukee, or sorry, in San Francisco with the Milwaukee game. So do keep that in mind today. Um, Let's go ahead and get in this slate and get at our pitchers here. So our top overall pitcher is going to be Hunter Brown for Houston. Now, he has had a lot of good games in a row. I do think he's a viable option today. I will note that he has not given up a ton of home runs this season either, which is definitely an advantage against Oakland. But they do have tendency to hit home runs anyway against decent pitching. He is pitching at home, which he has given more home runs there as well. And he did pitch one game against Oakland already this season, and 6 innings. He got 8 strikeouts. I kind of expect a similar type of game, but I do think that Oakland has some benefit after he gets pulled from the game, so to keep that in mind here. But he could give up a home run or two earlier in the game as well. The other options here, Blake Snell looks decent from Milwaukee, for San Francisco, though he does have a tougher match against Milwaukee. However, with the weather potential to limit the home runs there, at least that does give him a little bit more upside. Though he has had some tough games, he's got a good strikeout rate, definitely a viable option today. Michael King for the Padres has a tougher matchup in Seattle today. He did smash them the first time with a 9 strikeout game with 26 fantasy points. I think this is a pretty good spot for him. His strikeout stuff has been a little bit inconsistent lately, but he's had mostly good games. He hasn't had too many bad games either, so he's probably one of my better options if you wanted to either go away from Brown or even just go with Brown and King. You could definitely do that, but I do think King is a very viable option today. And then we have a few extreme GPP plays in Cole Reagan's, uh, uh, Gill for the Yankees against Kansas City, and Wu for Seattle against San Diego. All three of these guys do have some potential today, but they do have tougher matchups. But they also have enough strikeout stuff to be viable here. A couple other guys to mention, Pavetta and Ray, are both robust plays. They have high risk, high reward situations. And so I do think while they are viable, they don't have quite the strikeout stuff today to be super awesome. Then I do have two Hail Mary plays, one being Zebby Matthews from Minnesota. He's only pitched in a handful of games, and while he's had some bad games, he's had a couple good ones, and he has a very favorable matchup here against the Angels. He's also dirt cheap. I don't really expect a 20 fantasy point game, but I do think he can get enough strikeouts here to be a decent option on the slate, though he's high risk, high reward. And then Kokanevich for the Angels against Minnesota, also kind of a Hail Mary play, but he's closer to an unavoidable play. He's just had the ability to have a couple decent games this season, and he should go a decent amount of innings. The question is, if can he score enough fantasy points to pay off? But he is the Hail Mary of Hail Marys when it comes to avoid him most likely. But, for a contrarian lineup, you can kind of do that. But otherwise, both those guys, very high risk, high reward. Definitely. But Matthews will have some decent ownership today. The ownership will be Hunter Brown, Blake Snell, Michael King, and Zebby Matthews. So to keep that in mind as the top 4 ownerships, with Cole Reagan's, Pavetta, and Gill being kind of the contrarian options. However, I do think that King is Hunter, Brown, and King are definitely the best options on this slate. So let's look at our catchers here. Now, the bats today are kind of wonky and all over the place. I was a little surprised with how the metrics really played out today, so do keep that in mind. But it's going to be an interesting slate, I think, and we should get some good opportunities at different bats. Shea Langerlays does actually have very good fantasy metrics today. He has been pretty decent against Houston this season with 2 home runs in 9 games. He is capable of a solid game, and when he has been starting, he has been getting hits. I do think he's a little bit better bust here, but he is a decent option for home run potential. Adley Rutschman also looks good for Baltimore. He has been a little bit inconsistent lately, but he definitely has some good potential as he does have that home run upside today. He is very expensive though, so he's definitely not a must play. Looking at Yanir Diaz, he also has some potential for Houston. He's been hitting the ball pretty well. He has struggled more against Oakland though this season, but this is going to be a good opportunity for him as he's been hitting the ball very well lately, and he has that home run upside as well. Will Smith is a good option today as too, though he is a little bit more expensive than I would like him to be. But the ownership here, Will Smith, Christian Vasquez, and Tyler Stevenson, definitely kind of goes against who looks really good today. So definitely probably want to pay up either for Will Smith or go a little bit cheaper with Shea Langurlays or Yanier Diaz. Looking at first base here, Otani obviously jumps off the page as a top tier play every time out. He's getting very close to some crazy numbers with the stolen bases and home runs. Though he hasn't, he does have that home run upside today and has that stolen base potential. It might be a little bit weaker today than it has been lately, so keep that in mind. Ryan Noda looks absolutely fantastic today for Oakland. Let's see if I can find him here. He's only $2,800, and he allows you to get some cheap ability here. He has been in the AAA, which he struggled with the A's early this season, but he definitely has some potential to early, at least today. Now that he's back up with the main team, Lucan Baker also looks fantastic for St. Louis. He's probably one of my favorite plays at this position, even though he hasn't played many games and he has had some ups and downs. He does have good fantasy metrics today, so he's definitely worth a look. And then Paul Goldschmidt, if you just want somebody that's a little bit safer, he seems like he looks fairly good today, and I don't think he's going to be high owned either. He's been a little bit inconsistent lately, but he has a favorable matchup here, so he's definitely worth a look here. As for the ownership, Freddie Freeman and Jose Miranda will probably top ownership today. So another position where it's definitely going to be more contrarian to not go super chalky at this position because I don't think the chalky plays look all that fantastic. Though Freddie Freeman doesn't look terrible. He just looks average for him today. Looking at second base, Jose Altuve does jump off the page as a top over play. He's been fantastic the last 4 games with monster game after monster game. I look for that to continue here in a very favorable matchup against Oakland, who he has also been really good against. We also like Zach Geloff here for Oakland. He has been hitting the ball inconsistent this season. He's completely a bit of a bust play here, but he has hit the ball very well recently. In fact, he's in a nice little 7 or 8 game hit streak, and he's had a couple home runs, and he's getting some stolen bases. He's scoring fantasy points in different ways. He's also dirt cheap, so that gives him some utility here. Emmanuel Valdez, for Boston is also an interesting play that's cheap. He has struggled some lately, but he does have good contact ability. He just doesn't always hit the ball very hard. That said, he has some potential today as a cheap option. Eduardo Julian also looks like a good cheap play today. He had some moments in the middle of the year where he looked solid for a couple weeks, and he looks kind of like he's in that situation again. So he's definitely somebody to go with if you look at Minnesota. As for the ownership, Julian, Jose Altuve, Brandon Drury, and Chris Taylor are the top ownership. So you can definitely go chalky at this position, or you could go a little bit contrarian with Valdez or Geloff. But Julian and Altuve, depending on how you want to spend the money, definitely jump off as the best overall chalky plays at that position. Looking at the third base, Devers for Boston is phenomenal lately. He has some good fantasy upside with home run potential. He's also been really good against Baltimore this season, as we can see. I do think he's a viable option today, though he is expensive and hard to roster because of that price point. Meanwhile, Alex Bregman, while his price has come up some and then come back down a little bit, he's still a little overpriced for what I like him to be, but he's been phenomenal all season against against Oakland, and he's in a fantastic matchup here with really good home run upside. I do think he's a great option. Royce Lewis also looks solid for Minnesota today, though he is a bit of a best play, home runner best on this slate. He has struggled the last few games, and so he's, if he hits a home run, he'll pay off. If he doesn't, he probably won't. So that's where I look at it for him. Isaac Paredes is a good option, a one-off play for the Cubs, as he has been pretty good against the Dodgers, and he's been decent throughout the season. So I do think he's a viable option with a little bit of home run upside. Jose Miranda can also mix in here at third base as well, who was somebody that kind of looks okay at first. But as for the ownership here, Royce Lewis, Jose Miranda, Chris Taylor, Rafael Devers, and Cody Mayo. So Cody Mayo might be a cheap play that is going to be pretty chalky. But I do think, you know, going a little contrarian with either Alex Bregman or Paredes is probably the best way to go here. So you don't need to go super chalky at this position, but there's definitely plenty of chalky options available as well. Let's look at shortstops. This position is pretty expensive with a couple exceptions, but I do think it's a pretty deep position as well. You could go with Bobby Witt Jr., Gunnar Henderson, or Ella De La Cruz. All three of these guys look absolutely phenomenal today. They are very expensive, so you keep that in mind, but they definitely have that potential. Meanwhile, Mason Wynn is probably one of the better free, cheap options at this position. He hasn't been particularly great as he has been striking out a lot the last few games. In fact, he had 14 strikeouts the last 10 games, but he does have some good metrics for hitting today, and hopefully he can get back on track on this particular slate. Uh, Edmund for the Dodgers. Now he can play in the outfield or at shortstop for fantasy purposes, and he has been decent lately, so he's definitely a capable option here. He's he does have a little bit of a home run threat. Like he had 2 home runs in the last game, was first two of the season, but he is definitely a capable option today. Zach Neto is kind of a contrarian play as well, who has some utility as he's been hitting the ball very well, but he's high risk, high reward. For the ownership, Tommy Edman, Dansby Swanson, and Ella De La Cruz. I think Ella De La Cruz does jump off the page as the best overall option, but you could definitely go a lot of different directions at that position. Look at outfielders. This position is kind of wonky. I would probably fade some of the more expensive options here, and look more at Brent Rooker, Kyle Tucker, Jaron Duran, Jordan Alvarez is my top 4 plays. So that's Rooker, Alvarez, Duran, and Tucker. I think of the 5,000 plus guys, those are the top 4 options. But if we want to get a little bit cheaper here, Toscar Hernandez does look good for the Dodgers, though he is day to day, so you got to make sure he starts today. Jose Abreu, sorry, yeah, Willie. I don't know what I said. Jose Abreu. Willie Abreu for Boston looks phenomenal today, and he's nicely priced here. Same goes for Cedric Mullins for Baltimore, who's in a very solid opportunity there. And then Sia Suzuki, he's a little bit pricey today, but he's definitely drawing good metrics on the slate. A couple other guys to consider that's a little bit less expensive will be Matt Wallner, who was a great option yesterday, and he paid off very well. I look for him to have another good game here. Julio Rodriguez also looks decent for Seattle. It's kind of a one-off for them. Trevor Larnach is very cheap here and has some really nice upside on this slate at $3,200. And then Masataka Yoshida for Boston is a good contrarian option as well for them. The ownership here will be Tommy Edman, Cal Tucker, Mike Yastrzemski, and Jordan Alvarez, along with Ian Happ, Matt Wallner, and Mookie Betts. So do keep that in mind, guys.